All right, welcome everyone. Thank you. As we work through some technical difficulties, so we appreciate your patience with us. I will try to speed through this as much as we can. So we're gonna work through it a little bit differently with Dr. Ebert joining us on the phone with her presentation. So again, welcome. This is IDA is excited to partner with the ADA Business Transitions, otherwise known as ADAPT, for tonight's webinar. And we're focusing on topics relevant to those who are looking for an associateship or those pursuing private practice ownership and how the ADAPT program can assist in the process. ADAPT itself is fairly new. It was launched in Iowa back in October of 2019, and Iowa is still only one of 8 states to participate in the program. And so again, before we go too far, I'll just start with some brief introductions. I am Stacy Hilsbeck with the IDA, and I'll be assisting and moderating tonight's webinar, along with Kara Byland with the IDA as well. And then later on, a few familiar faces, probably for most of you, with Dr. Justine Stemper, Chair of the New Dentist Committee, and Dr. Brian Kim, who is IDA's 2020 New Dentist of the Year, so congratulations. And they will both be joining us later on for our panel discussion. And should you have any questions during the presentation, you're welcome to submit those via the chat feature, and we'll discuss those during that time. Additionally, we do have a couple on from the ADA Practice Transitions. We have Bree Simmers, Director of Marketing and Operations, and Coordinator Kathy Murtha. So they are on as well to help answer any of those questions. And we will kick off tonight's webinar presentation with Dr. Suzanne Ebert, who is the current Vice President of Dental Practice and Relationship Management for the ADA Business Innovations Group. Dr. Ebert graduated from the University of Louisville College of Dentistry, joined a practice as an associate in Florida, and later opened her own practice in Ponte Verde Beach, Florida, where she practiced for 11 years. Upon selling her practice, Dr. Ebert served as the dental director at a local federally qualified health center and also became heavily involved in the Florida Dental Association leadership. As adjunct faculty for the University of Florida, she works directly with senior dental students as they rotate through her clinics and continues as an advocate for organized dentistry. So please welcome Dr. Ebert. And Dr. Ebert, give me just 1 second and I will pull up your presentation here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to confirm that you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, in that case, let's go ahead and get started. I want to apologize to everybody for being the reason that this is running a little bit late today. Technical difficulties, but we're just going to kind of wing it and go with the flow. So again, I just want to thank everybody for having me this evening and giving me an opportunity to talk with you a little bit about a subject that's very important to me, which is practice transitions. As you said, I'm kind of on the 3rd iteration of my dental career. I've been a practice owner, I've been an associate, I've worked in public health, and now I work for the American Dental Association. So again, thank you for having me. I'd like to go ahead and just jump right in. I want to be conscious of everybody's time, and I know that I already wasted about 10 minutes of it. So if you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide, that would be great. Jumping right in, I'm excited to share with you some keys to success as you are navigating your career transition. I've been working with a lot of dentists over the last couple of years who are approaching either finding a new associateship or thinking about purchasing a practice. And I've discovered along the way a few things that are often overlooked at the very beginning of the process, which can create some anguish as things move forward. So things that maybe you don't think about so much, I just want to give some quick tips and tricks tonight. So if I can get nothing else accomplished, I would like to try to get across to you how important it is that you know what you want for your transition. You are the important one, and you need to know what you want, not your mentor, not your best friend, or not even your favorite podcast guest. What we will be focusing on tonight is what you need to think about as you approach this exciting time in your career. So honestly, I would say it's kind of late. Grab a beverage of your choice and let's go ahead and get started. So if you want to go to slide number 3, please. The first thing that's important is knowing yourself. So I like to ask my docs to begin with a little exercise that can help you to really understand your wants and your needs. It's very simple. Think of 5 things that are important to you. It could be your income, your physical location, leisure activity, time for family, being close to your siblings or parents. These are just some of the examples. Write them down and give them a number. Obviously, you want number 1 to be the most important thing. If you have a partner, ask them to do this exact same exercise. Have them do it alone, and then, most importantly, do it together. Talk about your number 1s and realize that these are the things that you will not compromise on. That's okay. It's really important to do this type of exercise so you don't waste your time on practices that just don't fit the bill. Now, this might seem really obvious, but I can't tell you how often this step is overlooked or occurs very late in the process, and it's led to a bunch of wasted time. You know, just as a quick example, I was working with a doctor about 2 years out of school. That doctor thought that the primary motivation was their partner's career and the need to stay in a certain location. So I showed her a number of practices where the location fit nicely, but it just never seemed to be exactly what she was looking for. So we ended up having another conversation. And during that conversation, I asked her and her partner to complete this exercise. Well, it became apparent very quickly that the real priority here was for there to be a stay-at-home parent. Now things changed pretty significantly in our search because the number 1 priority was really the income potential. I was able to point the doctor towards practices in smaller communities with higher income potential and a lower cost of living. We had a lot more success with the search now that the true priority had been identified. This just shows the importance of taking a few minutes to complete this type of exercise and identify the real priorities. Don't skip this. So now we're going to move on to the next slide, please. Your ideal practice. So now hopefully you have a better idea of what your priorities are. Now comes the next step. You want to visualize your ideal practice. You want to make sure to take into consideration things like your clinical persona. You want to know what type of environment you do your best work in and how the physical space around you affects that. You know, just for example, do you want something that's sleek and slick with lots of high energy and maybe even loud music booming in the background? Or do you prefer something that feels a little more homey, maybe with a fireplace in the waiting room and just some soft white noise in the background? Basically, you need to figure out what environment makes you smile and able to do your best work. Finding the right fit in a practice is worth its weight in gold. Let's think about it. First of all, your own sanity. If you are in an environment where you're comfortable and you're happy, your work is going to be better and you are going to be more relaxed at the end of the day. Secondly, sometimes this is missed, but let's think about if the existing patients are used to a certain way of being cared for and you're able to carry that on relatively seamlessly, how much more likely will they be to stay with the practice? It just makes sense to find a place that fits your personality. Now, along these same lines, don't dismiss a practice that kind of fits everywhere else, but is missing some particular metric that you feel is important. You can often work with what's there and create your dream practice as long as there's a solid foundation. You need to keep your mind open to the possibilities. Just as, for a few examples. You might find the perfect practice, it just might be in another state. Or maybe you were thinking that your perfect practice should be producing around $800,000 a year. Okay, you found a great one that's producing $400,000. But guess what? It's entirely fee for service, and maybe the current owner is referring out all surgery, and you happen to love doing surgery. Think about the benefits here. You'll have a service that you can provide that's going to have an immediate impact on the bottom line, and you will probably have gotten the practice at a very reasonable price. Remember that it's easy to create your dental dream home if the foundation of the practice is solid. My point here is do not limit yourself. We're going to move on to the next slide, please. So really what you want to do is you want to make sure that you understand the process from start to finish. Obviously, you're going to start with the first two things that we talked about. You need to figure out what the right fit is going to be for you. But then after you find it, you need to understand the process as it exists going forward. I'm not going to get into all the details of each one of these because that would take probably another 3 or 4 hours. But what you do need to understand is what the process looks like from start to finish. Meaning, do you know what contracts are involved? Do you understand that there is a negotiating phase? And then you want to think about it and understand what it means to you and your family all the way through to integrating yourself as a new doctor into a new practice. The point here is just to understand the path for your chosen transition. Being informed and understanding it from the beginning is going to help keep you from feeling overwhelmed as the process moves forward. We're going to move on to the next slide, please. Now, by this time, you're probably ready to start doing something concrete. So you want to write down your vision, and you want to refer back to it frequently. As you begin to evaluate opportunities, you're going to need to refer back to that piece of paper because I guarantee you can get lost. You also want to build your team, especially if you're looking to purchase a practice. You're going to want to start having conversations with the professionals that you're going to need as you move forward. You're going to want to find a lawyer that you feel comfortable with and that is comfortable in practice transitions. And you're also going to want to get an accountant. Remember, you need to interview a few different individuals or firms to find people that you're comfortable with and who share your values. After all, this is probably not the first or it's not the last time in your career that you're going to need a lawyer and an accountant. So you want to make sure that you're compatible with them. You also want to start the conversation with your finance team. You're probably going to want to talk to a couple of different banks, and you want to find those that, again, have experience in dental. Why do you need to start this process so early? This is before you've even found a practice. You need to talk with your finance people because there are some things that you're going to need to know. You're going to need to figure out what you can and cannot afford based on the debt load that you currently have. And you need to know whether you are going to have to find a seller who is open to doing seller-assisted financing. Up until, oh gosh, probably about 6 months ago, we were hearing a lot that the banks would provide 100% financing for a dental practice. That was already changing a little bit, and now in this current environment, we're definitely seeing that the banks are looking more at about an 80%. That means that you either have to have the money in your back pocket, well, hopefully your bank account, or you are going to have to find a seller who is open to doing some seller-assisted financing and help you out. The key here, again, is to make sure that once you find your perfect practice, things can proceed smoothly. It's all about being prepared. So, how do you find that all-important perfect practice? Next slide, please. It's time to start looking. How do you find the practice that fits? Well, we all know about job boards and school posting sites, and there are supply reps, there's Indeed, there's all kinds of different venues that you can find dental practices. I'm going to suggest that you check out ADA Practice Transitions. We're here to help you navigate this process, and we have the backing of the ADA behind us. So, what do we do, and why should you give us a try? Next slide, please. We make the process of entering a dental practice less stressful and more successful by helping you find the practice that fits your wants and your needs. We pay attention to the things that matter most to you when you're looking for your practice, and we're there to help you every step of the way. Next slide, please. So how does our process work? Well, we begin with an online profile. That profile collects all of the information you would expect. And then it goes deeper. Maybe to get at some of those things that you didn't expect. Everything that we've discussed this evening about your ideal practice and your personal and professional philosophy of care are captured in our online profile. Use that profile and match it up with practice owners who are looking either to hire or sell. We look for overlap in key indicators and come up with some options for you to evaluate. We will walk you through the process of evaluating the prospects and determining whether there's a high degree of compatibility. And if both parties are ready, we will walk you through the contracts process. Finally, we're there for you with advice and guidance as you begin working in the practice. We want you to be successful, and we will support you for as long as you like. Next slide, please. So why should you choose ADA Practice Transitions when there are many other options out there? We want to help you find the practice where you can be successful now and well into the future. And we know that compatible philosophies is a huge indicator of success. We have the ability to digitally show you different practice styles in multiple states, and we will assign you an ADA advisor who will work with you to narrow your options down and to navigate the process. Finally, we have all the resources of the American Dental Association behind us, and we want to support independent dentistry to the best of our ability. Next slide, please. Be sure to check out our blog, learn more about our company and our values. There's a ton of great and very practical information that can be found on our blog at blog.adapracticetransitions.com. Take a look at it. One of my personal favorites is What Went Wrong Wednesdays. This is where you can learn from the problems that others have faced during their transitions. As my grandmother was very fond of saying, you're going to make plenty of your own mistakes. There's no need for you to repeat mine. She was a wise woman. And we also have a lot of stories about things that went right. And we also have some tips there for ways to use our service most effectively. Next slide, please. Finally, we do have practices available in these states right now if you're interested in making a career transition. We'll be adding to this list of states in the very near future, so keep us in mind when you're considering a change. And next slide, please. You can always feel free to contact me via email at any time. I am Suzanne Ebert, eberts@ada.org. And I thank you once again for your time. I thank you for your patience as I tried to do this kind of flying a little bit blind. And I'm going to turn this back over to our wonderful host.
Thank you, Dr. Ebert. You did excellent on the fly there. So I appreciate all of that information. And I believe you said that you will go ahead and stay on here and kind of jump in and maybe assist in answering any of those questions that we have. But at this point, I will go ahead and turn it over to Drs. Stemper and Dr. Kim to kind of go ahead and take us through some of those top questions that have been sent in. And I will turn it over to you, Dr. Stemper.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I have a list of questions here, but we'll also be fielding more questions. I should specify I'm not actually the one answering the questions. That will be Dr. Kim and Dr. Ebert answering those questions. So if you think of something that we haven't covered, please use the chat function to get that message to us. So I have quite the list to choose from. I guess we'll start with how to negotiate a daily guarantee. Do you have any thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I know got added at the last minute, and I want to specify just by saying that I was in a unique situation. The only associate I've ever had is actually the dentist that I bought out. So his situation was a little bit different. We did not have a daily guarantee for him, but I had also just paid him for the practice, and he had a pretty good idea as to what his starting rate was going to be. And so I think the important thing when you're negotiating something like that is to remember that you're bringing a lot of potential value into the practice, but also look at what the dentist that's going to be hiring you or bringing you on is looking at. So they're going to be looking at, how much production are you likely to do in a day? How long is it going to take you to be profitable in that scenario? And that's the calculations that they're going to have going into their head about any sort of a guarantee, because there's not necessarily a guarantee on their end, and they are going to need to you're going to have to remember that you're bringing a lot of value to the practice, and so the guarantee on their end is the guaranteed pay for you on their end is a little bit of a risk for them, because they don't know exactly how long that's going to be, and they're gambling a little bit on you that then down the road you're going to be profitable for the practice in general. I'm sorry, Dr. Ebert, do you have a good tip on negotiating a guaranteed rate? I unfortunately haven't been in that scenario where I've been negotiating that personally.
I just would like to add a couple of quick thoughts to that. Number one, this is probably a good time to understand what dentists in your area are typically making salary-wise. Understand if your owner doc is willing to share what he's making. That would be a nice thing. I don't know that you'll get that information, but you can certainly ask others in your zip code. This might be a good time also if you're thinking about, do I need a guarantee or do I not need a guarantee? You may want to take a look at the office systems and how you're getting paid how they're planning on paying you. So what I mean by that and why it's important is if you are being paid as a percentage of your collections, let's say, you want to look at what those collections policies are, the ones that are currently in place, and what their collection percentage is right now. Take a look at that. And if the collections policies are not as nice as you would like, or not as well placed as you would like, you may want to consider some kind of a daily guarantee and maybe take a lesser percentage of the collections. Again, just take a look at all of the numbers and evaluate the systems that are currently in place and decide what's going to be best for you in the short term. And then also, I would strongly encourage any doctor who's looking at signing an employment contract, obviously beyond understanding exactly how you're paid, maybe include a clause that in 6 months, the salary is up for renegotiation. Just some thoughts.
Yeah, I think a really good thing that she brought up is know what percentage of collections the office is getting now, because that'll give you some idea as to if you're getting paid, just throwing a number out there, 25% of collections, but they're only on average collecting 70% of what they produce normally anyway, then that's gives you an idea that you may not get paid quite as much as you think in that scenario.
Okay, and another really good question while we're talking about payment is, how do you balance your student loan debt when you're considering buying into a practice, which obviously would be a huge financial commitment?
Right, and Dr. Ebert addressed this a little bit just because she was talking about now it does look like, or at least she was saying that the banks are asking for about 20% down if they're only financing 80%. So, you know, I agree with Dr. Ebert that you start talking to your advisors and your team that you're going to be working with before you get into that. And you want to have a plan when you're going into it. And if you're going to be increasing your debt, you want to make sure that you're going to be comfortable with that too. You are going to be increasing your debt, obviously, if you're buying a practice. And you also should remember that just because a bank will give you money doesn't necessarily mean that you want to max out how much they're going to give you. Banks will probably see you as a relatively reliable source of repaying that income. Dentists are relatively reliable. We pay back our debt. We have a relatively stable work environment. But you need to make sure that if you take on a big level of debt, that you are going to be able to sleep at night. Just because they'll give you the money doesn't mean that your mental state is going to put you in a position to do your best work if you're stressed about the level of that debt. Have a budget, map out your expenses, know what's fixed and balanced, not just for your personal expenses, but also what's fixed and what can fluctuate in a month for your practice as well. Because there are going to be some months that you have to pay rent, you have to pay that expense no matter what. But your supplies and things like that are going to be going up and down. Just kind of common the same sort of personal finance stuff you get anywhere else, just on a much larger and grander scale with a lot more zeros after those numbers than you may be used to. And that just remember that you want to keep some options open, because there's going to be things that come up that you're not expecting, that you may need to borrow more money or have a larger emergency fund than you're going to expect. We're all in an interesting situation because we had to shut down for 3 months, and that put us all, a lot of us have taken on additional debt, or we've had to burn a lot of emergency funds, or just throwing out a crazy example, at my clinic, we actually had a bird infestation, and we had to have the birds cleaned out. And so we had to take out a little bit more debt to get that cleaned up. So life happens. So you don't want to be totally maxed out on what you can possibly borrow just on the practice, because there's going to be more things that come up. So I don't have any great answer to that other than, budgeting and making sure that you're comfortable with the debt that you're taking on.
I do want to jump in here and put in a plug for a great resource through the ADA. And especially if we have any dental students on this call, you could possibly refinance your student loan debt at a much lower rate than what you took it out at. So there are a bunch of companies that do this. SoFi is one, DRB, which I think has changed its name to Laurel Road, and that's the one that the ADA has an agreement with. So you can get an extra 0.25% off on your refinancing if you go through with the ADA.
And I'll add an additional note on that too. When you're talking about refinancing, especially if you're going to a small town, talk to the small town bank in the area. We worked with, we have a satellite clinic, and our small town bank has been fantastic. And they have a vested interest in keeping you in the community because they don't want to see the practice leave. And so they have a little bit more incentive sometimes to give you a little better rate or a little bit more favorable terms, or be a little bit more lenient if you're going to miss a payment than if you call Wells Fargo or Citibank or Chase. You're just going to be another number to them. Whereas the local bank in town, they want to keep you there. The people of the city want you there.
Okay, moving right along. What's a reasonable non-compete clause for a contract, and how you negotiate that?
And this is I assume Dr. Ebert would agree that this will vary a lot depending on what type of community that you're in. Because if you're in New York City, 5 miles may be the same as 100 miles to us in Iowa. And when you're, it depends, and it depends which side you're negotiating from, because basically the person that you're working from just wants to know that you're not going to leave and take all their patients. And when I negotiated with the dentist that I bought out, it was 25 miles in 2 years from either office. But my purpose was probably a little bit different, because it was much more likely that in 1 year, if the guy I bought out had been able to set up down the street, probably he could have taken all of the patients back. If you've been an associate for 1 year and you set up down the street, it's probably not the same scenario. And so I would defer to Dr. Ebert as to what's reasonable and customary now, but I would just say that it probably depends a little bit on the community that you're in and the situation that you're going into. Dr. Ebert, do you know what is an average for a normal community?
Well, guess what? Just like everything else, it depends.
Yeah.
So when you're going in to negotiate a non-compete, what I would suggest is that you find out the radius that the practice draws from. Okay, because as you stated, 5 miles in downtown Manhattan's a lot different than 5 miles in, Platteville, Wisconsin. Two completely different animals. So what I would suggest is that you find out where 90% of the radius that 90% of the patients come from. If they come from within 5 miles, then a 7-mile non-compete is reasonable. If they come within 25 miles, then honestly, a reasonable non-compete is going to go a little bit more than that. Because again, the purpose is to protect the patients of the practice so that they're not going to go somewhere else. So that's how I would suggest taking a look at a non-compete. Instead of just saying a blanket, okay, a rural non-compete would be 25 miles and an urban non-compete would be 2 miles. Take a look and understand what a non-compete is really saying. It's saying that a certain percentage of the patients are coming from a certain radius, and it's there to protect the practice and protect the owner, as it should. But think about what the numbers actually mean, so that when you go in and you talk with the owner about it and you're in the midst of negotiations, you're coming at it from a position of strength. You always want to come at a negotiation with good information and from a position of strength.
Okay, I think we'll combine a few questions here to keep on moving time-wise. When you join a new practice, how do you get the staff to adapt to your new ways of doing things? And in addition to that, how could you spot a staff person that's working against you?
Yep. So it's not just when you join a practice. Right now, we're also all trying to get our staff to do some different things with all of our new protocols. You want to listen. You want to acknowledge that we're not perfect, and there may listen to what the concerns are if you have somebody who's not listening. They've worked for that previous dentist probably for a long time, and they have a lot of new loyalty. And I think I'm sorry, this was the question was about new ways of doing things, right, for coming in. So these people have been trained, and they've worked for 10, 20, 30 years sometimes for this dentist, and they're loyal to this dentist. And so they know how this old dentist has done things. They're going to be used to answering questions in that way. And there's no way to change that on a dime. So you're going to need to sit down with the person if they're having issues with it, and figure out what was the old philosophy, what might be a little bit different with your new philosophy. That I know Dr. Ebert addressed that a little bit as she was talking, that there are probably going to be changes, and the more changes that you have with a philosophy, the more of that conversation you're going to have. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is trying to work against you, because I know the next question is, how would you spot a person who's actively working against you? If they're used to if they're used to one way and you're putting in a big way or a big change, then they're just used to the answer being the answer that the previous dentist gave, and it's been that answer for 10 years, and you know it's always worked out, or in their mind it's worked out for patients. Patients are happy. This has worked for a long time. And don't be afraid that if there's somebody who's not working out, Dr. Ebert addressed earlier that you need to know yourself and know what kind of environment you're going to be in and do your best work. It's okay to let someone go. You know, you don't want to let the whole staff go because the patients will notice if everybody leaves. But, you know, we did have to let somebody go about 18 months after I joined, and she had been kind of contradicting some treatment plans that we recommended and would kind of recommend something different, and it would put us into a confusing situation with the patient. And so I think you need to listen, but you also just need, at the end of the day, if there's somebody that's not working out, you can make a change. It will be your practice at that point, and how your staff is working reflects upon you.
Yeah, I'd like to add just a couple of things to that. Number one, we just did a staff webinar on, last Friday. So if you go to our website, you'll actually find a link to it, and it's an hour of how to get your staff on board. So one of the things that I would like to suggest, if somebody's looking for something very practical to do, because as you said, it's so often that it's really just a matter of the staff person thinks that the owner doc's way or the senior doc's way of doing things is the only way to do it. So sitting down with the staff people and sitting at the table and maybe going through a treatment plan that everybody was really proud of, that one that turned out great, that everybody's just happy with, sit down with the owner doc and the new doc and treatment plan it together. I pretty much guarantee that every single case I've ever done, no matter how great it's turned out, I have thought about a different way of doing it after the fact. So if the staff can see the two docs bouncing ideas off of one another and coming up with maybe a different way of tackling the problem, the staff can get to see that there's more than one way to skin a cat. So beyond that, I'm also going to say that don't be afraid to call out a staff person that you think might be actively sabotaging. I had the unfortunate experience that my entire staff left my practice within 45 days of the practice sale. You want to talk about something really difficult. I had to sell very quickly because of some health concerns, and my staff was not prepared as well as they should have. It went too quickly and they weren't involved in the process. And unfortunately, the people who took over my practice did not share my philosophy of care at all. And I feel terrible for them. I feel terrible for me. And I feel really horrible for my staff and my patients, because it was an incredibly unfortunate outcome in that the practice ended up failing. So the practice closed within 5 years. I don't want that to happen to anybody else. So watch for the right signs. Find a practice that really fits your personality, and hopefully you will never have to experience that kind of a transition.
That's excellent. That actually answered a couple of the other questions that we have on here. So moving right along, if you're signing a standard contract, do you still need a lawyer, and why?
Yes, the short answer is yes. As Dr. Ebert said earlier, know what you want, and a standard contract is not going to address specifically what your concerns are. There's no standard contract, there's no standard dental practice, you don't have any standard employees. Every situation is going to have its own quirks, and you are going to be worried about one thing that's different than another person who's coming in, and the dentist that you're purchasing out or joining their practice is going to be worried about something different than whatever previous dentist had a standard contract. It's annoying to pay a lawyer, but it's better to pay a lawyer on the front end to review something before you sign it than to try to have pay a lawyer to get you out of whatever thing you don't found out later that you did not agree with. So my thought would be a resounding yes, that you should always consult a lawyer for a standard contract.
I'll go a little bit further than that, and that's if somebody says you sign the standard contract because you're not going, I'm not going to negotiate it with you. This is our standard contract with standard language, and you can't make any changes. I would go so far as to suggest that you stand up and you shake their hands and you smile very nicely and you say, "Thank you for your time. This is not the position for me." You should always understand what you're signing and what the implications are. I had one doc who ended up paying, I think, $75,000 to correct things that were in a standard contract.
Yeah, that should be a huge red flag. I mean, if somebody's not willing to negotiate at all, then there's probably a reason, and you may not need to know or care what it is, but there's probably a reason. So I think it would be a good sign to shake their hand and walk away, as Dr. Ebert said.
Well, that wraps up most of the questions that we had prepared beforehand. You've hit most of those. So I think at this point, I'd like to open up the questions to anything we've had on the chat.
Haven't seen any.
Okay, I have one here that was sent to me.
Okay.
Okay. If you're buying a practice and some of the staff members, like hygienists, for example, are being overpaid, how do you approach that?
That's a great question. I'm very grateful that I have not had to reduce somebody's pay for that reason. But I imagine that the way that I would go about that would you'd sit down with the patient and you'd want to have some, or not the patient, I'm sorry, the hygienist, and you'd want to have some reason as to why they're overpaid, because I guarantee they won't agree with your assessment that they're overpaid. And you can find data as to average hygienist salaries. You can find data as to how different, as to how associates are getting paid. The ADA has some resources on that, but there's also just state resources on that. You'd want to go into that conversation with your I's dotted and your T's crossed and your reasoning in place, and probably not expect a great response from the hygienist. But you do need to lay it out, because if there is somebody who's making well above what you're going to be able to sustain them and stay profitable, then you, like I said, you go into it with the numbers as to here's what an average hygienist makes. Here's you can go as far as you want. You can look at you can pull up the production numbers from EagleSoft or anything like that and say, here's what you're producing an hour and here's what you're making per hour, and this is not sustainable. But you definitely want to tread carefully in that way, or in that, before having that conversation. And like I said, make sure that you can justify why you're doing it. Otherwise, you're just going to come off looking like the dentist who wants more money off the top. Dr. Ebert, do you have a good answer on that?
Well, the biggest one is you already hit on it. You can't pay somebody more than you can pay them. You can't be held hostage to a staff person. When you take over a practice, the owner, the seller, is going to be terminating all of those employees. That's what they have to do. They can't force you to retain the employees. So you're going to walk into that practice and you are going to rehire them. And what you need to have are well thought out job descriptions. You need to go into it knowing what you can pay, and you need to stick to your guns. Because again, you cannot be held hostage to your staff or the owner's staff. It's your responsibility to make sure that the business runs efficiently.
And if you do have somebody who really just is not reasonable and you're not able to get them down to a level that you're comfortable with, it may stink, but you can let them go and you can hire somebody else and retrain them. There'll be issues with that as well, but you'll be able to find somebody as long as you have, as Dr. Ebert said, detailed job descriptions. You know what you're looking for. You know how you're going to be training them. It's not impossible to replace somebody. There are very few irreplaceable people, especially if they're out of your price range.
That was an awesome question. Does anyone else have anything? You can send it to us on the chat function. Otherwise, I think I'll turn it back over to Stacy and Kara to get us wrapped up here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. A lot of good information. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. Dr. Ebert or Dr. Kim, any last comments or things that you wanted to leave with the group?
There was always people like to know, what would I do differently, or what would I change looking back at it. And my only thing that I would say is that I was in dental school when I was doing my negotiations, and so I was a D4. My only thing would be that I probably got my head set a little bit too much on the location and the practice, and that probably wound up costing me money. I probably wound up spending more for the practice because I got set in my head that this is where I wanted to be, and it put me in a little bit weaker negotiating position. So I'm very happy where I am, but by all, it's worked out great. But that would be my one tip: is don't get too set on any one practice too early in the negotiating process. You can always be more flexible than you think.
I am so glad you said that. I see all the time dentists who are set on a single location, and they don't understand how many wonderful practices they are passing on. So I'm so glad that you brought up that particular point. I would encourage every dentist to keep their options all the way open, and meaning don't buy a house when you're in your 4th year of dental school. Keep those options open. You might be passing up on a true gold mine of a practice.
Great. We're seeing, I see one question that just popped up here, and how are you seeing COVID affect the valuation of practices right now?
This is a question of the month. I've been getting this almost continually, and the final answer is to be decided. Right now, the banks are wanting to see the production from the practice to reach at least 75% of last year's numbers. Once that number is hit, then suddenly the financing becomes a little bit more opened up. I have seen, unfortunately, financing fall through in the last month, and that has been in a situation where there was, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. There was a little bit of negotiating that had gone back and forth, and the practice price kind of kept changing a little bit. It was very odd. This is not one that we helped manage. It was just one that I'm aware of. And the financing ended up falling through because the practice does not look like it's going to get to that all-important 75%. So they're looking at waiting another 3 to 6 months before that will even be considered going through. So the valuation, I think everybody needs to understand that they've got to be maybe a little bit more flexible than they had anticipated on their purchase prices.
Is that they want 75% of monthly production, or how long? I mean, how long is that time frame measuring out?
They want to see 75% of the prior year's month to month.
Thank you.
So they want to see 70, like this, they would want to see 75% of June 2019 to be in June 2020 before they'll open up that financing again.
Got it. Thank you.
So it's a little bit crazy, and it varies bank to bank. There are some banks that are really being pretty hard line about things, and there are other banks that kind of say, you know what, dental practices are really good investments for us, and we know that it's going to be okay. So it really depends on the bank.
Great. Well, I don't see any others. For those of you who were looking for the link for the presentation that Dr. Ebert talked about, Kara has put that in the chat. We have also been recording today's webinar, so we will get this put up on the IDA's website so that people can access it, because there was a lot of good helpful information in there and things to think about for sure. So if you know of anybody else who might benefit from this conversation and discussion, please make sure that you help let them know that this is available to them. And we really appreciate Dr. Ebert and ADA Practice Transitions helping to put this on today, and Dr. Kim and Stemper for your great advice, and appreciate it. And I think that's all we have. So thank you so much, everyone. Hope you all have a great evening.